Lesson 10. Responding to events. Some things on the screen update in response to user input. For example, clicking an image gallery switches the active image. In React, data that changes over time is called state. You can add state to any component and update it as needed. In this chapter, you'll learn how to write components that handle interactions, update their state, and display different output over time. React lets you add event handlers to your JSX. Event handlers are your own functions that will be triggered in response to interactions like clicking, hovering, focusing form inputs, and so on. 1. Adding interactivity. Some things on the screen change as users interact with them. Think of clicking through an image gallery. When you click, the main image updates. In React, any data that changes over time is known as state. You can add state to any component and update it whenever something happens. In this lesson, we'll explore how to make components respond to user actions, update their internal state, and show different results over time. This is where your user interfaces truly come alive. 2. Responding to events. React allows you to make components interactive by responding to what users do, clicks, hovers, typing, and more. You do this through event handlers, which are your own functions that React calls when certain actions occur. When you attach an event handler to an element, you're telling React, whenever this event happens, run this function. This is how your components start responding to the outside world. 3. Adding event handlers. To make an element react to user actions, you first create a function that describes what should happen, and then connect that function to the element. For example, imagine a button that doesn't do anything yet. By defining a function inside your component, let's call it handleClick, you can decide what happens when the button is pressed, such as showing a message. Then, you connect this function to the button by using an event property like onClick. From this point on, React knows that when the user clicks the button, that function should run. Event handlers are usually named with the word handle, followed by the event name, like handleClick or handleMouseEnter. This makes your code easier to read and understand. You can also define the event handler directly inside the element itself, known as an inline event handler. This is useful when the logic is short and simple. 4. A common pitfall: parsing versus calling functions. One of the most common mistakes when working with event handlers is accidentally calling the function instead of parsing it. When you parse a function, you're giving React a reference to use later, when the event actually happens. When you call a function immediately, it runs during rendering, not when the user interacts. This means your logic might execute too soon. The fix is simple. Always parse the function, don't call it. If you need to run shortcode inline, wrap it inside another function so that React can call it at the right time. The key takeaway is, parse functions, don't invoke them directly. 5. Reading props in event handlers. Event handlers are written inside components, so they naturally have access to that component's props. This means you can use the data parsed from the parent component when handling events. For example, if your button receives a message as a prop, you can make it display that specific message when clicked. This makes each button or component behave differently based on the props it receives, even if they all share the same structure. 6. Parsing event handlers as props. Often, you'll want the parent component to decide what should happen when something is clicked or triggered. In that case, the parent can pass a function down to the child component as a prop. The child then calls that function when the user interacts with it. For example, one button might start playing a movie, while another might start uploading an image. The parent component defines what those actions do, while the child just triggers them. This separation makes components more reusable. A button doesn't need to know what it's doing, only when to do it. 7. Naming event handler props. You can name event handler props in your own components however you like. The only requirement is that when you attach them to built-in HTML elements, you use the proper event name that the browser understands. For your own components, it's a convention to start event handler prop names with on, followed by a capital letter. For example, you might have on play movie or on upload image. This naming style makes your code self-explanatory. It tells other developers exactly when and why those functions will be called. 8. Event propagation. When an event happens, it doesn't just stay with the element where it occurred. It moves upward through the component tree. This is known as propagation or bubbling. For example, if you have a container with buttons inside, and both the container and the buttons have click handlers, clicking a button will first trigger its own handler, and then the container's handler. If you click only on the container, only its handler runs. This behavior can be useful, but sometimes it's not what you want. 9. Stopping propagation. Sometimes, you'll want to stop an event from traveling upward through the component tree. Every event handler receives an event object as its argument. You can use this object to stop propagation. Doing so prevents the event from reaching parent elements. For example, imagine a toolbar with multiple buttons. Clicking a button might also trigger the toolbar's event, resulting in multiple messages. By stopping propagation inside the button's handler, only the button's own behavior runs, leaving the toolbar untouched. Stopping propagation is useful when an action belongs only to the specific element that was interacted with. 10. Passing handlers as an alternative to propagation. There's another way to manage behavior across multiple components without relying on propagation. Instead of letting events bubble automatically, you can design your components so that each one explicitly calls the next handler it needs to trigger. For example, a child component can run its own logic, then manually call a parent function that was passed down as a prop. This approach gives you full control over what happens and in what order, making your code easier to follow and debug. 11. Preventing default behavior. Some browser events have their own built-in behaviors. For example, when a form is submitted, the browser automatically tries to reload the page. If you don't want that to happen, you can prevent it by calling a special method on the event object that stops the default behavior. This is different from stopping propagation. Preventing default behavior tells the browser not to do its usual action, like submitting or reloading, while stopping propagation only prevents the event from reaching parent components. 12. Can event handlers have side effects? Absolutely. Event handlers are the right place to include side effects in your code. Unlike rendering, which should be pure and predictable, event handlers are meant to cause changes, such as updating state, saving data, or displaying messages. Whenever you need to change information or trigger an action in response to user input, event handlers are where you should do it. 13. Recap. Let's summarize what we've covered. You handle events by passing functions to elements. Always pass functions, don't call them directly. Event handlers can be declared separately or written inline. Because they live inside components, handlers can access props. Parent components can pass handlers to children as props. You can create your own event handler names that fit your app's logic. Events propagate upward unless you stop them manually. You can prevent default browser behavior when needed. Passing handlers explicitly is a clear alternative to relying on propagation. All of these tools together allow you to create rich, interactive experiences in React, where your components not only display information, but also respond intelligently to your users.